Knut, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stefan. Been wanting to speak to you for a while.
Yeah, it has been one of those ones. I've been trying to make it happen for a little while, but just things kept coming up, and now I'm in Sri Lanka,
Yeah,
and the time came, and I was excited to get to chat with you about Bitcoin and various aspects of it, and of course we'll have to get into this infinity over 21 million at some point as well, which I'm
yeah.
sure we'll get to that later. Let's just start with a little bit about you. I know you've been obviously you're a writer in the Bitcoin space, you're a speaker, and you've also been interested in Austrian economics as well. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, we have a lot in common. Like you're a singer too. I used to be a singer, or I am a singer in a way. I guess you don't stop being a singer. And speaking of Sri Lanka, my parents always told me I was conceived there. They
Oh,
went
really?
on a honeymoon to Sri Lanka in 1976. So
Nice.
and I'm libertarian leaning, and argue from first principles, and don't believe that anyone should have a right to more violence than anyone else, just as you. And I'm been interested in Austrian economics and Bitcoin for quite a while. So
Yeah. So
we're
I'm
almost the
curious
same
then, for
person.
you, did you start with Austrian economics before you got into Bitcoin? Were you like that, or were you the other way around?
I think I was Austro curious maybe before Bitcoin, but before Bitcoin I couldn't really. I didn't have a coherent picture of what was wrong with the world and why. I knew that something was wrong, but I couldn't really get it through my head. Uh, Bitcoin came along, and things started to make more sense and started to become a bit more depressing, of course. Uh, and then I read the Bitcoin Standard almost at the same time as I was writing my book, and that got me going quite a bit as well. And when I finally read Human Action, that's like the nail on the head. That's like the most life-changing book I've ever read, I think, and the best book I ever read. So if you haven't read Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, do so. It only takes about 38 hours.
Yeah, I mean, people throw a lot of shade about these so-called 1,000-page tomes, but really, once you've gone through it, it makes a huge difference. And look, for people who maybe they're not ready to go through whatever, however 900 pages or however much it is, if you start with something like Bob Murphy's book, Choice, which is like
Yeah,
a modern short form version of that. Of course, the best is to go and actually read Human Action yourself as well. But
yeah.
that's something I often recommend for people who are maybe they just need something that can stepping stone them into the pathway of reading about these things, because I think it really is. There are a lot of things that the Austrians got that get right, and it's only the Austrians who can explain that coherently.
Exactly. And I think also Anatomy of the State by Rothbard is a short, concise book that helps a lot. Uh, that can
Absolutely,
help a
yeah,
lot of
yeah. And so
noobs.
there's a range of different, I guess, topics and themes that you can draw from. And so in the Austrian canon, if you will, there's the books that are more economics based. And so, I mean, Austrian economics is meant to be wertfrei. It's meant to be value free. It's meant to just be, it's a statement of the economics. But
Yeah.
then there is also the more political philosophy element of it. And that's the more libertarian aspects of it, where there's the Austrian economics aspects of it. And sometimes people can mesh them without understanding where they're different and where they actually mix together. And so, but I can understand why, because it's often many of the same people, right? It's the same people making these different arguments, and they tend to hold both views, that they are an Austrian in terms of how they view economics, but they are also a libertarian in terms of how they view political philosophy and rights, and the question of, our rights, do they do we are we given the rights by the state, or do they exist antecedent, or do they exist outside of that, or perhaps it's a natural rights, natural law approach, or other approaches that libertarians take?
Yeah, I had a conversation with Robert Breedlove about this, and he came up with a brilliant sentence that praxeology is to the subjective what mathematics is to the objective, and that's a good way of framing it, I think, because praxeology is the great missing school subject, which like arguing from first principles uh, explains why people do stuff at all and why it's best to let people do stuff violently with each other. That's the best way of, like, for human progress in general and for maximizing human well-being, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And I can understand where people get confused because you might be thinking, like, as an example, it's possible to be an Austrian economist who is not a libertarian, right?
Yeah,
You might theoretically, again, it's unlikely, but you might think that this is the most efficient way, but you might not necessarily take the libertarian aspect of it. But look, in
yeah.
practice,
To that
they tend to
point,
be the same person, right?
that makes me think of a famous moment in Ludwig von Mises' life where he was having a meeting in a fancy hotel with all these other thinkers like Milton Friedman and Murray Rothbard and everyone, and he called and Hayek and everyone, and called them all, "You're all socialists,"
Yeah.
and ran out of the room because he felt that they didn't really understand him. Um, by the way, I was listening to your debate with Peter McCormack about libertarianism,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed it a lot. But I was frustrated by one thing, and that is how when arguing about and this happens all the time when you argue about a free market versus an interventionist market or like another political system. Uh, we often forget that a truly free market has never really existed. That's the thing. People say that wasn't real communism, but the thing is that wasn't real capitalism. Real capitalism hasn't been tried yet because before Bitcoin, we've never had a truly sound money, and not on a global scale, and that changes the playing field enormously. Like when I argue for libertarian principles, I always try to push the Bitcoin narrative into the equation, because without that, it can't really work in reality, in my view, because every other currency will always be inflationary because no human can resist the temptation of diluting the money supply.
Right. Yeah. And I'm with you there. I think it's hard for us to make that argument to people because we're rightly having to point out to them, hey, let's go live in this world it's never happened before. Right. And
No,
so
it's very hard. There's nothing to
that's
compare
where
it to.
I think in practice you end up having to point to real world examples, and even if they're imperfect, you can sort of point to that and say, "Oh, look, see, notice how these aspects of this society that existed before, uh, even if it's imperfect, that could show an example of why a free market would do something better than, say, the statist approach." Right? I mean, that's just
Yeah,
an
yeah,
example.
yeah, yeah. It was not meant as a critique of your arguments, because I do agree with them, and I do agree that there are you have to draw examples from real life and like from what actually happened. But what is so hard to explain is that we're approaching a completely new set of rules, and that has never been tried before, and that will truly show people the power of the free market, because I believe Bitcoin will benefit everyone. The more people that go on a Bitcoin standard and like hyper Bitcoinize themselves, the better it is for not only the Bitcoin hodlers but for everyone, because the mechanisms that it allows for will make production costs and transportation costs drop so rapidly that it benefits absolutely everyone, even those that never even heard of Bitcoin.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you there. I'm with you there. And I think this is one of those ones where it's difficult to explain because it's like we've lived all of our lives under a fiat inflationary world where the costs are rising over time. And so, what does it mean to live in a world where we're living in growth deflation, right? And so, someone like
Yeah,
Jeff Booth does a good job at helping put that in a pop, in like a pop economics way for people who maybe, if they haven't gone and read Mises and Rothbard and Guido Hulsmann and Philip Vargas and other people, that reading The Price of Tomorrow might give them a clue as to what kind of world that might be like. Because even for those of us like who are into Austrian economics, it could be hard to visualize really what would that world look like. Because in some ways, to think about what it would be to have like sustained prices falling is quite a weird and mind bending
Yeah,
idea in that way.
I think it's impossible for human beings in general. Like, people have such a hard time understanding exponentials. We're wired to think in linear terms, and like we're so used to the fiat system. What that is that we're used to being robbed every second of every day of something. Like a, a small piece of a small theft of our belongings and our time is happening every second of every day to everyone. Um, and like removing that from the equation will like not only relieve people of that particular bad thing that's happening to them, but also it will uh, like make all these misallocations of resources go away more rapidly. Like because what interventionist economies ultimately lead to is the misallocation of resources don't end up where people actually want them to end up, but they end up where some bureaucrat wants them to end up. And that like hampers the entire machine, because like the free market, I view the a sound money global free market economy, that's like the only defense we as humans have against the rise of AI. This is our uh, artificial intelligence, if you want, or like our collective intelligence. We can only utilize all of our brain powers, combined power via the free market. That's the weapon we have against the robots. Does that make sense?
Although, I mean, you could say that the free market might bring about a more AI, might bring about a lot more use of AI, and I think this is one of those things where even
Absolutely. Yep.
that could be a bad. I mean, even just setting Bitcoin aside, right? That could just be an example just there where it's. And I think this is also another thing where we have to where we. I'm often careful to explain things because I'm often trying to teach people, don't think of it like it's like some utopian thing. It's better,
No.
but it's not perfect, and yeah, bad things could still and will still happen under the total free market world, right?
Absolutely. But then again, I good things beyond our imagination could also happen. Like,
Yeah.
we don't know how powerful it could be because we've never experienced it before. We've seen like similar experiments, like the rise of Hong Kong, for instance, the last 50 years before the police state took it away again. But what happened during those 50 years was mm, uh, like progress that no human could have foreseen. And this the potential, I try to be an optimist, and I think there are rational arguments for being optimistic even in the world we live in, because things often turn out better than we believe that they will. Also, we shouldn't forget that, especially not in these dark police statey times.
That's right. With governments have some governments have literally never been more powerful than they are now, right? In terms of their
No.
surveillance capability, their capability to control the way people think. In some
Yeah.
ways, they're able to control a lot of things about how the masses think about things, the messaging they receive. It is very confronting in that way. But of course, I also do believe Bitcoin is going to fix a lot of these things. But it's about how do we get to that longer term vision? Because in that short and medium term, we still have to make it there, and so there's still going to
Yeah.
be all sorts of drama on the way to get there.
It is problematic, isn't it? And I, yeah, I have to tell you a story about when I flew home from Mexico. I was in Mexico about a month ago at the
Yep.
Bitcoin Standard Conference, and when I flew home, the 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 Southeast Asians were wearing masks on in airports like 10 years ago, right? So they sort of like started the trend and made it like after a while you didn't notice it anymore. It became sort of a natural thing, and then overnight the entire world wears masks when they fly. Uh, and when I flew back, I saw three Southeast Asian guys in full hazmat suits on the plane. So-
Is that
and I
next?
thought like what are you doing, guys? Was it, didn't you learn anything from the mask thing? Are you really going to push things push things this far? Like, but I don't know if yeah, I don't know even know if their ethnicity had something to do with it. That's not the point, but I mean, of course not. It's uh w- why trying to push the narrative even further in that direction? Can't you see what's
Some people are
happening here?
panicked, right? Some people are just
Yeah, they
that
are.
panicked, and that's
Yeah, they're
that's
so
the real
scared.
shame for a lot of this stuff is just they have been put into such a ridiculous state of hysteria that they will do anything. And so that also is an interesting question, because it's like, where do you see that going longer term, or at least in the sort, call it short to medium term, for freedoms and liberties in the world today? Now, part of the answer, I think, is going overseas, getting to other countries and other jurisdictions, and having that competition. That hopefully that will enable people who want freedom, Bitcoiners typically, and others who want that freedom, to try to get some of that. But I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on where that's going?
Uh, yeah, I think it might go two different ways because there are different countries have had very different approaches to this. Australia and Sweden are two very good examples of that, and I think uh, uh, history will evaluate, like the future will evaluate what happened historically, and at some point, uh, I believe the mask. Uh, the all these mask mandates and everything, they might actually go away someday because people are so fed up with it. And there are protests everywhere. So there is a lot of pressure on the politicians to stop the madness also. We shouldn't forget that. So it might end naturally. I know most Bitcoiners, or most Bitcoiners, many Bitcoiners think that we're heading towards more and more police state things and more dystopian. And that might also happen. But and if that happens, that will like push things like Bitcoin and alternative uh, ways of life further, push those things even um, faster into the future. Like flag theory, for instance, more and more people will get a second passport and try to bypass things by doing Bitcoin and by getting on Tor and like not using the main social media platforms anymore, but alternative ones and everything. So there's a perk to things getting darker as well because it fuels the fire of those of us that want to get out of it. But then again, I think governments can go too far, and there's like a signal from the people there too. So there might be uh, Trudeau, for instance, like the next election in Canada, maybe he gets voted out of office, and you get someone that is against all these mandates, and all of a sudden Canada is back to sort of normal again. I don't know. Who knows, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to predict the future.
Of course, yeah. I mean, one challenge is that some of these government programs, once put in, they don't get taken away. Or, as the famous
No, I
Milton
know.
Friedman says, there's no such thing. There's no no thing as permanent as a temporary government program. Or even
Which
if
is
you look at,
yeah,
war on terror, war on drugs, war on, you name it.
yeah.
How long these things have gone, but that's one side, and then the other counterbalancing side is the competitive pressure, because people will leave if things
Yeah,
get really bad.
and to that point, I really like that, because Friedman also talks about how institutions, once in place, fight for their own survival first and foremost. And those institutions that don't survive very long. It's an evolutionary process. So bureaucrats tend to find ways of motivating their own existence. And this is a very bad thing, of course. But then again, there are some counter examples in history, like the fall of the Soviet Union is one of my favorites. It just dissipated and
Yeah.
disappeared, basically. Uh, Same with East Germany, it just disappeared. What happened over time with East Germany and West Germany, though, is that uh, some of the West Germans heard the stories from East Germany. Oh, like you have to pay for kindergarten here. We never had to pay for kindergarten. You have to pay for healthcare. We never had to pay for healthcare. So the West Germans started to vote for socialist policies because they forgot why they shouldn't in the first place. So in the long run, the ironic thing might be that the fall of the Berlin Wall makes Germany more and more socialist again, and so there's a balance there somewhere, I think. And uh, was it Reagan that said that we're only one generation away from losing our freedoms at all times? And I believe that to be very true. That if we want to live in free states, or semi-free states at least, where you can at least express your opinion, you need to fight for it every generation. It's a good thing to teach your kids.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it also does come into the whole conversation around homeschooling, unschooling, and things. This way of trying to educate the next generation without having so much influence from the statists, obviously, who want to push things in a certain direction, and then those of us who actually want freedom have to push back the other way and actually do something
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. We should at least, if you don't homeschool your kids, at least tell them what's wrong with the schooling system. Like, at least give them a clue to why they shouldn't listen to everything their teacher says, and why they should question everything, because that's the basis of it. I, Knowledge comes from, first and foremost, from curiosity, and if you're not curious, you don't get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things in this whole theme of preparing for a hyper Bitcoinized world and trying to either to prepare for it or to try and ready yourself so that you're well equipped to make it there, right? To make it through
Yeah,
that short and medium term. And so I think you've written on this kind of topic as well. I think you've written a piece called
yeah,
"You Are Not Prepared" or "You Are Not Ready."
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. No,
so
quite a while back now, but there's something to that. Yeah.
yeah, so I guess if you had to summarize that for people who are maybe they are more of a new coiner, they're not really as familiar. What's this idea? Why are they not ready?
Because Bitcoin's value increases on average by 200% per year. And right now, it looks like the long term curve, is sort of leveling off. But that might not be the case. It might be an exponential curve that has the shape of a weird S like this, or
Hmm.
like a J shape, or whatever. Because one, so we don't know how much Bitcoin's price will go up over time. But like simple game theory and the fact that its supply is limited should tell us something about that the price will go up over time. And as I've stated on many other pods and in a video and an article, is like, I believe um, network technologies almost always have an S-shaped adoption curve if they're successful, right? So there's like a Heinz ketchup moment where everyone starts to get on board, and then there's a steep rise, and it levels out again when the entire planet is on board. It happened to the TV, the radio, Facebook, and Google, and so on. And I believe that could happen to Bitcoin too, but the price of Bitcoin will follow a very different path, because there's a lot more money and a lot more things in the world than there are people. So once the entire human race is on board and has some Bitcoin, there's no reason for them to stop buying Bitcoin. And hyper-Bitcoinization, like the definition of the term, is when every other monetary asset is has been converted to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is the only money we have. But it doesn't stop there either, because once we're fully hyper-Bitcoinized, we live in a sound money, free market global economy without interventionism, which is such a it's a much better system for organizing human effort and human action across both time and space. And that in turn will make prices go down even faster than they do now. And prices of production and prices of transportation, everything going down at enormous speeds. And which means that the purchasing power of a Bitcoin can only go up uh, faster after that point. And of course, I don't know if I'm right about this or not, but this is ties into the "you are not prepared" thing. Is anyone really prepared for two more zeros at the end of the value of Bitcoin? So, like, what is that? Like $5 million per Bitcoin instead of $50,000?
Right.
Is
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah.
really prepared for that? Because I mean, just I mean, you probably 100x your dollars worth in Bitcoin. I don't know how many Bitcoin you have. I don't care, and but I know you've been in the space for a long time. So, and people who've been in the space for a long time and who've understood that hodling is the best tactic, because very few people can trade better than 200% per year increase, right? So if you have a compound interest, like, which makes you probably at least 100x your initial position, nominated in dollars. Uh, uh, which means if that happens again, you if you put in $1, you would and you 100x and then 100x, you would, for every dollar you put in like 2014, fast forward to 2025, every single dollar might be worth $100,000. So if you put, well, the math is pretty simple, and I think no one is really prepared for 100x gains in anything. So, and when that happens, are you the thing people should ask themselves is like, do I really own my Bitcoin? Do I really control my private keys? What third parties am I trusting? Is this really private? And all of these things, all of these questions, as you know, the more you learn about it, the more you ask yourself these questions. And I recently quit my Fiat job just because I feel I don't have enough time for the Bitcoin stuff. I need to do this. I'm having a front row seat to the future, and I really need to grab this opportunity while I can, and not only this type of thing, but also learning more about how to become more self sovereign. And it's a journey definitely worth taking, I believe, for everyone sooner or
Right,
later.
I see. Yeah, so I guess I broadly agree with the idea, right? And I think many people in the space have been talking about this. The earliest I recall is someone like, say, James D'Angelo of, I think in around 2013 or 14, he was talking a similar kind of concept of like this S curve adoption and what would it look like on the price. And that really, as you zoom out, it just, what looks like a big move, when as you zoom out, is really not that much of a big move.
No.
Although I think my my estimate of where things are going to go is it does have to taper off. It has to taper down at some point. I think, yes, it's true that if you were to look at the casebitcoin.com and you look at the CAGR stats, like right now, the 10-year CAGR stat is something like 144%, something like that. But I think it will taper down over time. But in terms of longer term, what kind of ballpark are we talking? So as I'm sure you know, Hal Finney put out that number, and I think that was in like the first week. He put out that number of $10 million per coin, and I think something, let's say ballpark, something in that $10 to $20 million per coin US, in purchasing power terms, obviously, because by then it will have inflated a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I think
but
that is totally reasonable. And
but
then,
a,
yeah, But go
A
on.
question then: do you think it will have like a 2% deflation from that point and sort of a linear thing
Yeah. So if I had to
after?
guess,
Yeah,
yeah, what I would say is once we get to kind of that sort of not really
plateau.
terminal value, but you know what I'm saying, call it
Mhm.
something in that range, it might then settle down into something like 5% per year or something like
Yeah,
that. You know, it might kind
but,
of, that might be the kind of longer term, call it,
but
growth rate.
but but what if I'm right here, and it doesn't settle down, but it speeds up?
I
Because
mean,
I,
yeah,
and
I don't know.
where does
Yeah.
it end? Because I don't see an end point. If we have the most effective system ever produced, and as you say, it might fuel the AI revolution in ways we can't imagine. Uh, so that you have a deflation rate that increases year by year. So because I, I I believe very few things in life are linear. uh, and stuff that has to do with value and markets and stuff, that's never linear, right? uh, and if you if you have an absolute finite supply of bitcoins and they are lost every day, someone is bound to lose. The more users you have, the more people there are that lose their bitcoin per day. So you have even a shrinking supply, a larger user base, a more productive society, decreasing prices. All the vectors here point to there not being a point where it levels out and settles on a price.
Who
you,
knows? I think of it like it will reach a point where, like, once we've hit that saturation, right now,
yeah,
a lot of it is being driven just by just the mere fact that we're so early, right? We are
yeah,
talking 1 or
right. Now
2%,
we have,
you
yeah,
know, of the
exactly. So
world.
so
And so
yeah,
there's still huge, gains to come. And I think
yeah,
that's pretty uncontroversial amongst Bitcoiners. But I think the
yeah,
point about would it settle down to a something like 5 or 10%, and don't forget that would still be an exponential growth rate, right? Just at 5 or 10%
yeah.
every year,
It's
right?
a
Compounded
compound.
every year,
Yeah,
five
compounded
percent.
interest.
It
Yeah,
would
yeah. I
be a
know, I
lot.
know.
Like once we're
Yeah,
talking about global adoption, that would be massive. Because even today, countries like developed countries might be doing 2 or 3%. It's like
yeah,
a
yeah,
good thing if they can do 3%. That
yeah.
now, in
And
fairness, that's kind of measuring GDP growth, which is not the best
yeah,
measure
GDP is
anyway.
a very bad measure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. It's like there are various Austrian critiques of the GDP metric, so that's a
Yes.
fair point, and I think you and I and
Valid
probably
ones.
many listeners would agree with that point.
Yeah.
But you know, if it were to say 5 or 10% per year, and we're getting, like I think that would still be an incredible growth rate. And
It would. It would.
yeah, and but I guess it also comes down to that question of which things do you think Bitcoin eats, right? And perhaps this also gets into
Yeah.
this whole conversation of infinity divided by
Yeah.
21 million,
Now,
right?
now we're getting somewhere, Stefan. Right?
Right,
Now we're getting into
because
the meaty stuff.
yeah, because this is where I think it's fair to say Bitcoin would eat a lot of the bond market. I
Hmm.
think a lot of the debt market will be gone. A lot of the property, as in like physical, property market, a lot of
Yeah.
that has been blown up by the fiat bubble, so to speak. But I do see definitely a big value and a big role still to be played by equity as a concept in general. There'll still be a lot of companies who, they need to equity as their method of capitalization, as their method of
Okay. So
funding.
explain equity to me like I'm five, please.
You own a share in a company. Yeah, you own
You own a
a
share in
parcel.
a company.
You
Okay.
own a parcel
So
of a company.
all right. So you have uh, the argument against that is that what is the most saleable good in the world? It's money, right? By
Right.
definition, money is the most saleable good in the world, uh, which should be the thing that people want the most. And doesn't that include the equity as well? I mean, even if you had a company that seemed really, really good at what they do and had really, really good progress, wouldn't you want like a perfect money instead? Wouldn't that be even worth even more to you, considering that that money would represent not only that company but every other company in the world and their progress as well?
So
So
let's.
wouldn't the equity market shrink to zero over time in a sound money world?
I don't think so. Reason being, eventually, right, as part of that tapering off that we're talking about, so instead of 100% per year or whatever it is, it's going to taper down, and at some point there will be companies who outperform Bitcoin. Right now, it's very hard for a company to outrun Bitcoin over the long run. Very few companies
Yeah.
have ever even achieved this incredible feat. But
No.
so call it 10, 15, 20 years from now,
Yeah.
in that world, it would be quite common. It would be quite commonplace for companies to outrun Bitcoin returns. And what we're talking about here is like the growth deflationary benefit that you get just for simply hodling.
Mm,
And there'd be companies who are outperforming that because they, as an example, just to throw random numbers, let's say the growth deflation number for Bitcoin is 5%, right? Your purchasing power growth is 5%, and
yeah.
there might be companies doing 15 or 20% in that world.
I would even argue that in a hyper Bitcoinized world, only companies that outperform Bitcoin would survive, because there would be no point to running a company that wouldn't outperform Bitcoin.
Maybe, but I mean, I could see it like maybe there are some things that you want a company structure that maybe somebody doesn't have enough equity yet, and so that's where they're using equity capital to maybe sell a portion or a parcel of the company to be able to run their different endeavors, right? Because it comes down to why does the firm exist? Why do we have these things?
Yeah, yeah,
And in some cases, it's because there's a genuine market need for why these things exist. It's not that. Uh, I mean, I see it like yes, money is the most saleable commodity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only thing you want to hold.
no,
And
no,
I'll give you another example. Even in a world where that was fixed, people's demand to hold money can change, right? So, as an example, if there
yeah,
was a
yeah,
big natural disaster, your desire to hold money in that time period is a lot higher. Your demand to hold money versus other things is higher at that time. And so, even on that basis, the relative valuation of Bitcoin would change. And so, I guess for me, the way when I say I don't agree with the infinity over 21 million meme, for me, it's more that I think of it this way: if you think from an accounting perspective, it is quite feasible that, and I mentioned this in episode 296 with SafeDean as well. It's this idea
yeah.
that
I listened
okay,
to that. Yeah.
yeah. So
Mm.
just for anyone who hasn't heard that episode, the point would be, let's say, just assuming to make the numbers easy, let's say there's 21 million bitcoins. I view it like it's possible for global wealth, and it's not just possible; it's very likely that the global net worth would be greater than 21 million. And that's not a problem per se. It
No,
just
no, no.
means that the accounting valuations, if you add up all the
Yeah,
property and all the stocks in the world,
yeah.
that it adds up to more than 21 million, right? As an
Yes.
example, it could be 60 million Bitcoins worth of global wealth, but only 21 million Bitcoins. And so
Yeah,
that for
but
me
here
is
you
why
get
I
into
disagree.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
go on. I'd love
I
to hear your
remember
thoughts.
that, and I heard that argument on the you get into some philosophical arguments here. Like if you had a society with only one good, say one property, and it costed o- the entire sum of the money supply of that society, would the total sum of that society's worth be the money and the house, or just the house?
Well, one is measured by another,
The other,
but I
because
think
I've
it
heard.
kind of breaks down when you have just one good though. Like
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah. But I've heard the argument that it's actually infinity divided by 42 million, because it's the worth of all the Bitcoin plus the worth of all the things. And I don't really buy that, because the Bitcoins in themselves wouldn't have value if there was nothing of value to buy for them, right? And to your point, the thing with the equation is like, it was never meant to be dissected. It was just meant to be a meme, because it's meant to be a reflection of the that there's no upper limit to where the price of Bitcoin can go. That's what it's supposed to do, because mathematically the equation is useless, because infinity divided by anything is infinity, right? So it makes absolutely no sense, the equation. So it was never intended from my side to be anything else than like a wake up call for people that look at this thing. It either goes to zero, which is very unlikely, or it never stops growing in purchasing power. It never stops going up. It's very binary. There's only either it fails or it doesn't fail, which means that it goes up over time indefinitely. So that's what the equation was supposed to mean. But I do get the critique, and that there might be more things of value than there is money in the world, and that ties back, for me it ties back even further to Austrian economics and more philosophical things. Like, there are things that are more valuable to people than money could ever buy. The Mona Lisa doesn't have a price. They offered ABBA $1 billion to go on a tour 10 years back, and they said no, and they're doing it now instead because they want to, and not because they wanted the money, because they didn't feel they needed the money. So of course, value is a subjective thing. So regardless of how you try to attach an equation to value, you can never really measure it. And like, uh, not even with Bitcoin, it's like the best ruler we have for it, but it's still incomplete, because value is something you create in your head, and you know this, of course, since you're into Austrian economics. And I think that's the whole misinterpretation of the whole thing. I'm trying to put an equation on something that can't be put an equation on. uh, but the equations, the purpose of the equation was just to trigger a thought process in people's heads, and it seems to have succeeded at that.
Well, okay, yeah. I think for me, I just see it like maybe I'm just being silly, but I just to me it just I just it just to me it sends people down a weird pathway. Now I agree with you. I think in this sense, I agree with you in the sense that a lot of people have not really deeply thought through the idea of growth deflation, right? Of holding
No.
a money in which we're living in a growth deflationary world. Now that is a very astounding concept, and that is a very worthwhile thing to think about. But there's all these other little things that come to it, and I think I'm just sort of careful that people don't go barking up the wrong tree in terms of thinking like, oh, money is a measuring rod. It's not.
No.
All the world's wealth has to be contained within the amount of money supply
No.
that we
No.
have. It doesn't.
No.
It's so those are just my critiques of it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
also just this idea that like it just makes sense to me that the world's productivity growth has to taper. Like it's not just going to be doing like 100%.
Yeah. No. No.
Well,
No.
I mean
But
that part I could be wrong.
the,
Theoretically,
this
it's
this I
yeah.
think this part of the rabbit hole is a better discussion for us too, because this might be where we differ. Because I'm not entirely sure. You might be right. It might taper off. It's likely, because nothing has infinite growth, right? And everything. But what if for like the next 10,000 years it doesn't taper off?
Well, then yeah,
Because
you would. I mean, let's say if that
yeah,
happens, you'd be right. Yeah.
say you have a 5% deflation the first year, a 6% the year after that, a 7% the year after, so that it's not even just compound interest, but an increasing compound
Right. It's like
interest, so that they
compounding at an accelerating rate.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, um, that's the scenario that I believe people can't really get into their heads, because it might not be likely, but it's still possible for that to be, like, maybe not for 10,000 years, but for 100 years. It's not that hard to think that might last for 100 years. I mean, we've had inflationary currencies for like forever, so which is like 2,000 years in human thinking, which is not forever, by the way. Anyway, and what that has led me to, my latest thought on this is that Bitcoin is already the best store of value ever discovered. That's obvious once you understand it. It is very quickly becoming the best medium of exchange ever invented, via the Lightning Network. People buying burgers in El Salvador for no fees at all whatsoever, instantly. But the thing I'm very unsure of is the unit of account thing, because if it keeps on being volatile, and if it keeps on, like, in this J-shaped scenario described previously, uh, uh, it wouldn't really function as a unit of account. Not even in a world with like five, as you say, is that tapers off with a 5% per year increase. Uh, it would be very difficult to use sats as a unit of account because price. We have to remember that stable prices is the fantasy. That's the artificial thing. That's what fiat currencies do. They artificially increase the prices of everything. So it looks that the prices are stable when they're really not, because all the production costs have gone down and all the transportation costs have gone down, and you can't really see how fool you've been because the paying for anything, everything gets cheaper over time, right? So if you have a satoshis as the unit of account, how do you live in a world where every day which is like the inverse of a hyperinflating world? It's a hyper-bitcoinizating world where prices like drop faster and faster every day, so it's impossible to plan ahead for the future because hyperinflation
I mean, like deflation. Yeah,
yeah,
maybe. I would
one
see it like
divided
this
by
though.
hyperinflation.
Right. Yeah. So I guess what you
Yeah.
would be saying is would be growing so quickly that it would just be like it would be hard to find your feet almost because things would get so cheap so quickly
No,
you wouldn't even
what
know
I'm
how
saying,
quickly you could buy
yeah,
things. You know.
what I'm saying is that it might be easier to use a more stable, if you will, unit of account, like kilowatt hours or liters of milk or whatever, something something other than sats, because sats will not be stable. They can't be
I
by
don't know.
design.
I just see it like it's going to be unstable, but people are just going to use Sats anyway. You know, think they're just going to be getting very rich very quickly, and their purchasing power is going to be shooting up. Uh, and but here's the other thing: there's all these other factors that we could layer on. One example: demographics. Right? I could
Yeah,
say to you, okay, Knut, I'm okay. So I'm in my 30s now. Let's say 40 years from now or 50 years from now, I'm towards the end of my life. Let's say I'm in my 80s. Let's say my average life expectancy, whatever, 80 something, right? I'm not going to live forever. I might at some point want to spend more. And so even that would change the way things are because let's say after all those years, I think, okay, look, I'm not going to live
yeah, yeah,
forever. I'm going to start spending, and whether that it could be on some big grand projects to leave so
yeah.
that people remember my name or whatever it is, and I start spending some of my stash down. That's an example where a lot of new coins would come into the economy, and there'd be other old hodlers who are spending some coins or
Yeah,
whatever.
that's happening right now. Like the number of wallet users with 1 Bitcoin or less is going up. The number of
Mm,
users with 100,000 Bitcoin or more is decreasing. So it is distributing wealth, which I find very fascinating. Uh,
yeah, but I guess the
yeah,
point is that could also impact the quote unquote growth deflation aspects of it because every time some person with a lot of coins is spending a lot of those coins and putting them
yeah,
back out into the
you
economy,
get some liquidity. Yeah,
and it would then that could counteract against this idea of massive growth every because
yeah,
they're spending some
yeah.
down, right?
In a way, well, not over time, since the supply is absolutely limited.
Right.
Uh,
So
but
it matters how many more people are trying to accumulate versus how many people are trying to spend at that given point in time. If a lots of people are trying to
yeah,
spend and not as many people are trying to accumulate, well, then that does depress the purchasing power.
of
Yeah.
course, that's how markets work, right? So, but uh, I was thinking about another point. Yeah, the point of, like, if you look even in El Salvador at this point in time, uh, people are people are not using sats as the unit of account. They're using dollars. Everything is priced in dollars still,
Yeah.
and because it's easier, it's a better unit of account at this point in time. And I think something like the dollar, that, like, remember that the gold standard, the only reason that gold was a good form of money was that it's had an inflation rate that was reflecting the deflation rate of everything else, right? So so go, or the, like how how many more goods and services were in the it reflected the expanding economy. The gold expanded at almost the same rate, so prices in denominated in gold could stay uh, the same over long periods of time. But that's not what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin is not gold. It's something completely different. It's absolutely finite, absolutely scarce. We have never encountered that before. So I think we should be humble when making predictions. I should be humble making my J-shaped prediction, of course, because it's outlandish. But even like people who think it will tamper off should also be humble because we don't know if it will tamper off ever. We can't really predict that because we've never seen a commodity like this before, and that sort of ties into what the what I'm trying to do with the everything divided by 21 million equation, like fuck with people's brain, if you will.
So, if most people are not ready, what are some of the mistakes that you see people making, and how should people be thinking about it if they don't want to make a mistake on the path to hyper Bitcoinization?
uh, the first thing is get off zero. And that's the most important lesson for most people. Like, get off zero. You shouldn't own zero Bitcoin. You should own some Bitcoin, and then just wait. And at some point in time, those Bitcoins will be the lion's share of your net worth, regardless of how rich you are at this point. At some point in time, those Bitcoins will be worth more than you are, or than your total net worth at this moment. And at that point, it will be much less profitable to use violence against you to get your money. It will be much more profitable to provide you with something of value to get some satoshis in return. And this is the most beautiful aspect of Bitcoin. It makes violence a lot less effective on every level of society. I mean, you can threaten me and threaten my family and take all my Bitcoin, and good for you, you did. But that wasn't all my Bitcoin. That was like 1,000 of my, you can't know how many Bitcoins I have. No one can know how many Bitcoins another person has. So, so it makes violence a lot less effective. Because, yeah, yeah, I don't need to go into that any further.
Yeah, for sure.
What,
Yeah. So,
what, I think I've lost the question. Was there a question there
oh, I was just
somewhere?
saying, what are some of
I
the
do this all the
common,
time.
I guess, mistakes that you could see people making along the way because they are not ready? And so I think in most cases it would be people, as you mentioned, firstly, not not owning any Bitcoin or not hodling any. And
Yeah,
then the other one obviously would be people who are perhaps spending too quickly or spending too,
yeah,
before
yeah.
before
Of course.
they've kind of really let Bitcoin grow to the level that
But
we all believe it will go to.
that's sort of part of the learning process, right? Uh, Dabbling with shitcoinery and losing, seeing 5 years later how much that lunch you paid for in Bitcoin is actually worth today is a very very good lesson. And
Yeah.
so that comes naturally. So, but the first thing is get off zero. The second thing is don't spend them. The third thing would be, or maybe the second thing, are they actually yours? Do you hold your own private keys? Because it's a very important thing, and has been a mantra among Bitcoiners for forever. You know, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, and it's still true. And then, of course, you get into all the other steps, like should you store them in some other way? Should you do multi-sig? Should you are you technically competent enough to do this or that? Should you uh, should you run your own full node? Should you do this and that? Should you coin join? Are you actually in the driver's seat of this thing or not? And there are so many layers to that and so much to learn. So I think no one, I mean, it's not trustless. You have to trust a lot fewer third parties, but there's always some trust involved. Like, you have to trust hardware manufacturers. You have to trust. There's always some trust involved, and depending on where you are and on your Bitcoin hodlings, you should adapt to that and, like, okay, I have this many Bitcoins. They're worth this and this much now. Now I need to go to the next step. Now I need to learn how to do this and how to do that. So, well,
Yeah.
hope that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah. I think these are just lessons and things that people have to think about. And of course, I think one tip that people could take on as well is just to feel that urgency of stacking. Because
Yeah,
when you are first new, everyone, basically all of us regret not stacking harder when we could have in the
yeah.
earlier, in whenever your earlier days of Bitcoin were for you or for whoever. Uh, that's a common thing. So but again, that's related to that idea of everyone buys Bitcoin at the price they deserve. Well, everyone gets that sense of urgency to stack sats at the price they deserve as well. But
I,
that's also probably an important lesson for people out there. If you're a relatively
yeah.
new Bitcoiner or you're new to this, then just keep in mind that you want to have your automated stacking plan and you want to be stacking and regularly accumulating, because you'll regret it in a year or two. You'll look back and think, oh wow, I missed out on so many sats.
Yeah, yeah. But uh, I have very few regrets regarding my Bitcoin journey. Really, I lost the staggering amount of $10 on trading shitcoins. $1 in each of 10 different shitcoins, and I saw quite quickly that two of them were going up in relation to Bitcoin, the other eight were going down, and I thought, I can never figure out which one is going up and which one is going down. I don't have the time or the patience or like the luck necessary to do this. And like diversifying the basket is just it's going to be a net loss. So
Yeah.
that lesson was easy and it didn't cost me that much. And I've been a maximalist ever since, of course. But so I have very few regrets, even though I've given away Bitcoin and like I should have stacked more at some point. Everyone has those thoughts, but if you truly grasp this thing, you know also that it's never too late, and it's never too late to start stacking. It's never too late to like do something with it. And a good resource to start with would be your course on sailor.org, right? That's Bitcoin
Yeah.
for beginners. Yeah, 10 hours
Bitcoin
of
for everybody.
knowledge.
Yeah.
That's like Morpheus training Neo type course, you know. But by the
Well,
way,
there's only
there's
so much you can do. But yeah.
but by the way, there's no way that we won't be disappointed by the next Matrix movie, right? There's a
Yeah,
new
it looks pretty bad, to be honest. But
un-
hey, we'll see. We'll see, right? Um,
unless Gigi had something to do with the script, I'm sure I will be disappointed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Gigi's great. If Gigi was involved, I'm sure it would be a fantastic movie. But unfortunately, I don't think they got Gigi involved. Don't
No,
worry, we'll have to. There'll be like Bitcoiner remakes, right? They'll go back and take these terrible movies and remake them
yeah,
in good ways. So
yeah. The
that's
memes,
what.
the memes will be fantastic.
That's it. That's right. So yeah, look, I think that's probably a good spot to finish up there, Knut. Let's finish up and give the listeners, if you've got any closing thoughts for them, and of course, where can they find you online?
Uh, Most of my Bitcoin stuff is still on Twitter. I'm at Knut Svanholm on Twitter. I also have an author page on Amazon, amazon.com/author/Knut Svanholm. I have a Patreon as well, if anyone is interested in that, now that I'm trying to support myself only doing this Bitcoin philosophy stuff. Um, and well, that's about it. Well, yeah, well, I've made a bunch of videos with Yoni Appleberg and Guy Swan, and you can find them on YouTube. Just search for Knut Svanholm, and I'll bet you'll find them there. Or search for everything divided by 21 million. I share the playlist quite often on Twitter as well, shilling them. And
Excellent,
yeah, I'm very proud of them. Those videos.
awesome. Well, yeah, look, we can take our disagreement about the infinity meme and put them to the side, but thanks very much for joining me today, Knut.
Yeah, I don't think we disagree that much, and I'm looking forward to continue this discussion in real life someday, Stefan.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.